even if we take that argument at face value, when people ask about, well, shouldn't we treat everybody the same? Shouldn't everything be equal? My answer is yes. In a perfect world, we would all be treated equally. We would all have equal opportunity. We would all be able to go into work and not have to worry about the things that people who are underrepresented do in the workplace. That is not what the reality is. And the reality is, until we have the same access, the same opportunities, the same networks, the same compensation, the same ability to get promoted, we have to focus on equity. That is why these programs are needed, because we are not yet equal. Once we are, yeah, let's talk about treating everybody the same. Until then, I'm not buying it.
Hello, Right on the Money family. If you're a returning listener, you already know what time it is. Get ready for another enlightening episode of Right on the Money. And if you're new to the show, a warm welcome to you. You're tuned in to the podcast that's always about inspiring business owners to overcome their obstacles, grow their business, and lead greatly. I'm Janae K. Wright, and I'm joined by my co-host, Deshaun White. Today, we're tackling diversity, equity, and inclusion, and with the expertise of Cindy Joseph, CEO of the Cee Suite. As a business leader, fostering a diverse and inclusive workspace is not just about responsibility, but a pathway to unlocking your organization's true potential. We'll explore effective strategies to cultivate a culture of diversity and inclusion, one that empowers your team, enriches your workplace, and goes beyond empty promises. By the end of this episode, you will walk away with an understanding of the role of DEI in driving organizational performance, strategies for focusing on inclusive workspace, and the importance of assessing and enhancing your DEI efforts.
Cindy Joseph is the founder and chief executive officer of the Cee Suite LLC, where she advises leaders and organizations in varying stages of their talent management and DEI journeys and helps teams transform their critical people practices. She also coaches individuals one-on-one as they seek to elevate their leadership skills and overall professional impact. Prior to launching the Cee Suite, Cindy led talent programs for two of the world's leading financial services and consulting companies, Goldman Sachs and Accenture. Her key areas of competency include recruiting, diversity, equity, and inclusion, performance management, and leadership development. When Cindy is not at home in Brooklyn, New York, she spends much of her personal time traveling the world. She's a graduate of Howard University, where she earned a degree in psychology and is a certified professional diversity coach.
In addition to our CEO to CEO chat, we're thrilled to invest some time in discussing the new online course developed by leadership coaches Cindy Joseph and Brittna Bennett of the Cee Suite. The Line program is a 6-module online course designed to empower professionals to identify their unique talents, forge a pathway of purpose, and boldly manifest their visions into the world. If you're a professional looking for guidance on the next steps to take in your career, the Align program could just be what you need. So sit back, relax, and let's get into this episode.
Thank you, Janae. Thank you, Deshaun. I'm so excited to be here and be in conversation with you.
As we've been hearing a lot, right? DEI has been in the news in different aspects. A couple years ago, 2 years ago, it was the golden child. It was the thing everybody needed to do to make their companies become this this utopia place to work. Now we have people, I'm not going to mention any names, in different parts of this country who are so anti DEI and anti what they think it is. I think is part of the biggest problem, right? So I would love to start with just this. Let's have a conversation on explaining to everyone what exactly is DEI and how is it how it should be a part of your business.
DEI, as I see it, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is just table stakes. It is the foundation of being able to run business effectively, to have high performing teams. And while I don't talk about the business case for diversity as the reason to do it, I mean, there are all these studies that tell us diverse teams, inclusive teams, they have better performance, higher revenues, all of those things. Um, I think about it from the human to human perspective, right? The world is only becoming more diverse, more global. Um, there's an opportunity to impact not only the person who has the job, but the communities and the people, the economies that they support. And in order to truly get the most out of everybody, in order to truly have a workplace that is fair, that allows everyone to bring who they are into the workplace and deliver their best for themselves, for their livelihoods, for their communities and families, we have to think about how we engage with each other, how we set up our processes and systems and make it so that each of us can bring the best of ourselves into the workplace. And so that's kind of how I think about the DEI space.
A lot of times when I talk to clients or other people, it's they're trying to put DEI on top of their systems, right? They're trying to see how they can keep doing what they always do, but let's have a little DEI person in the corner over here to help us deal with this situation, rather than let's actually dig up the foundation. Let's actually go to the core of why did you start the business? How do you engage employees? How do you engage people in your organization and implant DEI into that fabric, right?
Oh my goodness. Yes. I mean, listen, we talk a lot about operationalizing DEI and weaving it into just the way that you do business. Doing it as an extracurricular or something on the side, um, not only is only going to get you so far, sometimes it could be more hurtful and harmful than it is helpful in ways. Like I think about if you were going to, like, let's say you wanted to buy a home and you went and found a house to buy. It looked pretty on the outside, it looked okay on the inside, and you're like, this is the home. You find out that it's got termites and wood damage and all this other stuff, mold. And what you say is, you know what, let's just slap some paint on it and keep it moving. You're only going to get so far. Like it might look pretty for a little while, but eventually the rotting wood is going to continue to rot and probably bring down the house at some point if you don't fix those things. And so, yeah, you can't just have it as something that's on top of a system that doesn't work for everybody.
So part of my organization is HR, right? So my organization does accounting, HR, virtual assistants as Primus. And when we go in to an organization, part of our work is that, right? And even before, we don't consider ourselves DEI experts like you, but we do consider ourselves, how do we build equity into our company, into every fabric of what they do? And one of the things that we always go into do, and we always start with is like your employee manual, right? How's your employee manual really help push the DEI mentality across the board?
Absolutely. I mean, that is a great place to start. And I love that you started with equity because that's actually where we start a lot of the conversation. A lot of times people want to start with the D part, the representation, the recruiting. Let's just bring a bunch of people in, and that's how we'll do diversity. When in fact, a lot of times what happens is we're setting people up for failure, right? We're bringing them into companies that aren't necessarily built to have them succeed. So yeah, you start with what are the policies? Are the policies equitable in nature? And it's everything from how do you make decisions around performance management and people development. It's also, I've seen manuals. Even last year, I did a project with a hospital, and they've got dress code things that can be very gendered, or even from a cultural perspective, how someone is able to wear hair. All of these things, we can start taking a look at that and seeing, is our workplace truly built for everybody, or is it based on standards that were, very outdated, and who do those standards benefit is really what I ask myself a lot of the time.
So I love the fact you brought up diversity, because I think this is one of my, I don't want to kind of pet peeve, but this is one of the things I've run into. I think, as you said, a lot of organizations feel like the diversity part is just, let me hire a C Suite person of color, and then I've done my job. But there's another part to this that I've run into as well, where employees don't understand what diversity and DEI mean, where we run into people of color who feel I should get the promotion just because of DEI, right? Just because I'm diversity, and I should get paid more because of that. And how do you explain DEI not to the company but to the employee?
That's interesting. I have not had that experience where I don't think I've had yeah, I don't think I've had the experience of people from marginalized groups saying I deserve this because I am this, but I do think I've heard more people advocating for themselves um, and having a bit of more of a voice in these last few years than maybe what they felt comfortable with in the past. But I think you're right from the standpoint of there's often different understanding and definition of DEI based on if you are a senior leader at the top, you make the rules, you have the budget, you decide what the policies are. People who are in management who are sort of squeezed between pressures from leadership, but also having to like lead other people and then, focus on the ground. And um, having to explain that to different groups of people does mean different things to me. I think at the foundation of the organization, I try to position it from the standpoint of, do we have an organization that is psychologically safe? How do you engage with your colleagues insofar as making sure that you are collaborative, you are respectful, you don't have to agree with everybody, but being respectful in the workplace, I think, is important. How do you collaborate from the standpoint of how do you show up? So if you notice something, if you see something, say something, kind of culture, right? If you notice that someone has had their idea stolen or was overlooked or experienced some sort of bias or microaggression, in what ways can you, especially if you're someone with privilege and power, use that to help to create a sense of camaraderie and advocacy and collaboration with your colleagues? As you go up the chain, as you have more power, I think there's more responsibility in having more power. So if you are a people leader, we talk to leaders about inclusive leadership. How emotionally intelligent are you? What do you tolerate and what do you reward? Because that then perpetuates behavior in the culture. And as you become the most senior, you have the opportunity to change policy. So that handbook that we talked about, you're the person who can say, we no longer do it this way. This is what we want to be in this organization. You're the person who can write the check. So pay inequity is a big thing, especially from a gender perspective. And if you break that down by race and gender, it gets even worse for Black, Latino women, Indigenous women. You can manage, you can make the approvals on budget decisions as it relates to compensation. Not that there's a unlimited pot, but you have the ability to do that in ways that people at the lower levels of the organization may not. So it means different things to different people, and we try to meet people where they are.
My wife, I was going to ask her if I could mention the name of the company before this meeting. I didn't do it, so I'm not going to. She used to work for a Fortune 500 company, and she expanded my idea of what DEI was from how they treated her. Right? Um, Granted, Black woman, all that, but I think there's other parts of the diversity cube that people don't realize. Right? So it's not just an ethnicity part. There is, gender part. There is sexuality part. There's actually the old boys club, right? There's a part where the diversity you're trying to create can be, I need people from different schools, from different colleges, not somewhat all coming from the same college because there's a single-minded mentality because they were all taught the same way. So I think the way we see DEI and understanding the nuance of what equity actually means is very important to help people understand how do we engage in work, right? How do we make sure that whoever comes into the organization, as you said, feels safe, feels secure, and can grow in that organization and not be stifled because of that cloud or that ceiling that's over their heads.
Yeah. And I would say that is, I think, the expansion of our understanding and definition of diversity is a positive, insofar as, when we talk about it too, we're not just talking about gender, race, sexual orientation, disability. There's so many ways in which we show up in the workplace, in which our histories and experiences advantage us and disadvantage us. I mean, we have this wheel that we use, and it's sometimes little things like who has to use public transportation to get to work versus who can, drive and has access to their own car, depending on where you are. Obviously, we're in New York; everybody takes public transportation, but depending on where you are in the world, that may make a difference. What language you speak is if you're in the United States, if English is your first language versus if you had to learn English and you speak with an accent, what impact does that have? So we've expanded our definition of what it means to bring different experiences into the organization and why we should pay attention to that. At the same time, where you started our conversation was, in the last 2-3 years, a lot of organizations have moved to do something about DEI. And we very quickly have seen a retreat from that. There's a lot of resistance. There is a lot of, people are just bold about their beliefs that, you can hold whatever beliefs you want to hold, but when it does become disrespectful and harmful to other people, that's where I have an issue with it. And I think part of the pullback around our expanded definition of diversity is then, the anti-woke crowd then says, well, everybody's diverse, it's everywhere. And, that becomes their catalyst to pick at it. But I do think it's a beautiful thing that we're recognizing all of who we are as humans.
I think people don't realize it just takes one, right? Like you have that, like you could have a whole company where everybody thinks that we're all homogeneous, we're all thinking the same thing, but you have that one person, that hiring manager who has a different mentality, and it changes the company automatically, right? And I don't think people realize that. For me, part of the DEI framework is to get to the gatekeeper of the company, right? That person who's bringing people in, get there to change their mentality a little bit, because understanding how important it is to have a much more diverse population in your of employees will help you get to a different level.
I have a question. Something that Cindy said really brought this up for me. What are both of your thoughts about the most recent rollback on affirmative action, and how has that affected DEI efforts, especially people reaching out to you, Cindy,
Mm-hmm.
for help in that area?
I have all kinds of thoughts, but Janae, let me know if you want to go first. Or, um, you know, obviously it was a huge setback, I think, for people who are advocates in particular of equity, because that's really what affirmative action has been. It's been a tool to help to rebalance where people were not being given the same access and the same opportunities. It was an equity tool. And what a lot of people have rightfully pointed out is at the same time that the Supreme Court has decided we don't need this equity tool for race reasons, right? We can't make decisions based on that. There are still many, many colleges that have legacy admissions. So you can get a leg up in the admissions process because your grandparent or your parent attended that same university. And so I don't understand where the meritocracy is in that process, right? That is essentially affirmative action for people who have that kind of access. So that's how I feel about that. But I think, unfortunately, it will have ripple effects from a organizational DEI perspective. We're already seeing the next leg of this, which is not necessarily organizational DEI, but the same person who brought the case to the Supreme Court around affirmative action has now gone after a fund that supports women of color owned businesses and is going after it with, I think, similar arguments, right? So we're already seeing the next wave of this, but within organizations, the most direct, I think, obvious impact is if colleges that are feeders for early talent become less diverse because of this, then obviously that impacts the diversity of the pool that people are, organizations are potentially tapping into. And I think more broadly, it opens the door for people to bring the same arguments or lawsuits around whether or not these programs or these initiatives are truly needed still, if they're fair to people who are not within certain marginalized groups. For now, I think people are already starting to think about, do we start to just call diversity something different? So it isn't as much of a lightning rod. Do we, focus on the pieces that don't necessarily call out certain groups or what have you? I have mixed feelings about that, but I think very smart people are trying to figure out how we get around it. And whether or not it's impacted my business, I wouldn't say the affirmative action ruling has. I will say um, we have seen the wave come and go. I mean, there were periods of time where we could not keep up with the inquiries that were coming to us for help. Um, daily, every day, multiple inquiries, and that started to wane. Then it was a couple times a week, a few times a week. Then it was once a week. I mean, so um, I think we've already seen the peak of the interest in um, really doing a lot of the repair work around DEI. Not that organizations aren't still doing it, but I think that rush to do it has come and gone. But what I will say is now I see the clients that we're working with are the clients who really want to be in the work, right? So they're not doing it for the trend of it or for the urgency of the moment of it. It's more so like, we get it, we have to be here, we have to be in it day to day. It's going to be slow, it's going to be painful sometimes, but we want to do it. And those are the clients we're working with.
So, I've been doing that research on the gentleman's name. I can't recall his name right now. But just understanding what was his catalyst for this, right? And like the statements he said, and I know people's statements, what's in their mouth and what comes out of their heart, it could be completely different. But the statement he said is that he's trying to create a world where equity is part of it. So he doesn't believe that minority neighborhoods should be policed more than anybody else. He doesn't believe that anyone should have a foot up or a detriment because of the color of their skin or because of their ethnicity. What I think he keeps forgetting is that America's foundation is very old and is very built on that same situation. So regardless of what you personally feel the world should be, they are gatekeepers in every aspect of our lives, right? You can have the greatest police force in the world, but you have one police officer who gets into that police force who has a more hatred mentality. The police force is going to change because of the interaction with the community. So I think there's a bigger issue in just saying things out loud but not understanding the repercussions of what's going to happen. I don't believe that DEI is going anywhere, right? And I always told my parents this when I was growing up. I always said that hip hop was going to change the world, right? Because it's going to bring more people of different diversities together. So I think as our age group, all races start to really take over companies, right? I'm not going to be over dramatic. 70% of them is going to make changes that's going to be positive, right? There's still going to be like 30% who's going to do the craziness that their grandfathers taught them, but there's a good percent of them that's going to want to make changes. And as more of us and more of connectivity between the different races at a younger age, I think is going to continue to grow and continue to be able to see more of DEI work. I think it's going to be a lot less broadcasted, right? And there's no more blowhorn for it. But I do believe there's going to be organizations who understand what has to happen, and as more of us get into those seats of power in organizations, they're going to look back and realize that something has to happen. Right? So I'm not on his side at all. I think he had something happen to him in his youth or his childhood that made him this bonkers dude. But
You're giving so much more grace than I am to this individual, but you know what? I'm gonna let it go.
like I said, I do not agree with it at all. But I listen to the words come out of his mouth, and like I said, most people mouth and heart is not the same. But I do see problems coming up the road, right? There's a whole bunch of organizational funding that goes towards underserved minority communities that's going to be in jeopardy because of this, right? If he's going after, if he has the audacity to go after a black woman ran company who's trying to support black women, that's like the smallest niche on the planet. Like, it's a black woman-led organization trying to have black women. When he's going to go after the YMCA's, when he's going to go after the Boys Club, when he's going to go after all those organizations that are out there trying to help inner city, rural areas, because all those are part of the same shell. So it's going to be an interesting time over the next couple of years to see what's going to happen.
Well, like I said, I think you've given this person grace, and I think it's fine to say we don't know what's in his heart. But I will say, I will say, I personally don't believe any part of that belief in equity on his part is genuine in any way. But even if we take that argument at face value, when people ask about, well, shouldn't we treat everybody the same? Shouldn't everything be equal? My answer is yes. In a perfect world, we would all be treated equally. We would all have equal opportunity. We would all be able to go into work and not have to worry about the things that people who are underrepresented do in the workplace. That is not what the reality is. And the reality is, until we have the same access, the same opportunities, the same networks, the same compensation, the same ability to get promoted, we have to focus on equity. That is why these programs are needed, because we are not yet equal. Once we are, yeah, let's talk about treating everybody the same. Until then, I'm not buying it.
I don't buy it either, but I'm gonna say that's words versus heart. Sorry.
Really, really, really want to talk a little bit more about Cindy, your expertise, how you're going into organizations and helping them with their DEI efforts. And, I know one of the things that you do at the C Suite is that you perform assessments on organizations. But my question is, how can an organization assess themselves to be able to know that, hey, it's time for us to get someone in here to help us with our DEI efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. And interestingly enough, we have put out guides. We actually did one this year with an organization called the National Multifamily Housing Council. We've put out guides to help people or organizations do this for themselves. So it's not too dissimilar to the type of work that we do. But I will tell you when you probably need some outside help. But a lot of this is looking at a few things. One, what do your people say about their experience? So we encourage organizations to, and a lot of them do this now too, but to survey their people, sometimes have follow-up interviews and things of that nature. The key with surveys is not just to survey people and have one blanket pool of data. You have to ask for demographic data, because part of what I'm going in to understand is not how overall the organization is doing, which is a good benchmark. But if I break that down, do the women have the same experience as men? Do non-binary people have the same experiences as the dominant group? Are people of different racial groups, sexual orientations, ability, career levels, departments, tenure at the organization? Are all of these folks having the same experience? And if there are pockets where people are not having a good experience, then we can start to dig into, well, what's going on there and why? And that gives us some information to then work on. It's also important to look at policies and practices. So the first piece, you talked about this, Janae, is, do you even have policies and some structure and standardized ways of making important decisions? And that's critically important, because when it's just up to us to trust our gut or to do it the way that we have been doing it, some people naturally are looking out for everybody, and then others are, even inadvertently, I don't want to, again, back to head and heart, I don't want to make judgments on why certain decisions are made. Sometimes it's even just you haven't critically thought about the thing, and then it ends up disadvantaging certain groups. So those are a couple of ways that you can start to assess your organization. So one, do you have standardized policies about important people decisions? And two, have you surveyed your people and asked them what they need? If you feel as though you have the expertise, the bandwidth, and frankly, the objectivity to then take a look at that information and start to parse it out and decide, okay, well, maybe we should put on this program, maybe we should change this policy, then by all means, I think take care of what you can on your own internally. We get brought in oftentimes because people are not sure what to do with that data. I had an organization just recently contact us because there were some differences between how their women were experiencing the organization. It was largely, I think it's like an engineering kind of tech organization, very few women. The women weren't experiencing the organization well, but the leaders were like, we don't know what to do with this. So that's when you get an expert to help you figure that out. Sometimes, because you're part of the organization, it's hard to be objective. Or even if you can be somewhat objective, sometimes there might not be trust within the organization that you will be objective. And so having a third party who doesn't have an interest in one group or another can be helpful. And then sometimes it's just bandwidth, capacity. They've got all kinds of priorities going on, and they want this to be a priority, but they've got to figure out where do they get help. So those are how we think about helping people with the assessment process.
I like the fact you said the objective part, right? I think that's an important part that people underestimate, right? We've been working for so long that we've collected multiple samples of employee manuals over the years. So when we get into an organization where we're in control of the employee manual, we're going to think back to exactly what was done from whoever wrote that manual when the company first started, right? Or you can go on Google and try to find one for yourself, not realizing that manual does not have anything to do with the culture that you're trying to create in your organization, or have anything to do with how do you want to bring people in and maintain the kind of culture you're trying to create. So even that objectivity part is an important part, right? Because I'm as a business owner seeing the same way, right? When we go to work, and things that are familiar to us, we're going to go to because it's easy and we can do it in a second. But breaking that objectivity and bringing back somebody who can help you look at your thing in a way that you're not seeing it, right? It's an important aspect of that DEI work to ensure that they can realize that, oh, we can't do this anymore. No, it's not 1970. We can't do that anymore. We got to make some differences in how we work.
What are, as it relates to the type of work that you do at the C Suite, what are some of the strategies that you use when it comes to fostering an inclusive workforce and helping organizations get to that goal? There could be, some moments where they're feeling like, man, we're not exactly hitting where we want to hit in the time that we want to hit. How do you talk to organizations about the strategies that you use, and what are some timelines?
Yeah. I'm going to give you an answer that's probably going to be very frustrating, which is it depends. Um, in terms of, I'll give you examples of things that could come out of an assessment, but really honestly, it just depends on what's going on within that organization. Typically, when we would go in and do an assessment, there are pages and pages, 5, 6, 7 pages oftentimes, of actions and recommendations. And one of the first things we do, because we know it can be overwhelming, to hear the feedback, but also to think about how do I tackle all these things that you are now recommending, is we actually help by triaging a little bit for the client. So we organize for them, we gave you these, let's say, 15 things that you could be doing. Here are the 5 that we think are immediate to-dos, because either there's a huge risk here, there's something that you have to change immediately, or it's just so easy to do, it doesn't cost money, it doesn't cost a lot of effort. If you flip this switch, you can get some impact pretty quickly. So this is your immediate action. These are the things that we think will take you a little bit longer to get in place. Maybe you have to get a budget together. Maybe a certain committee has to weigh in on how we're going to do it exactly. Maybe it's just going to take time to build this thing. So these are your medium-term actions. And then long-term actions would be things that we feel need to get done, but they're just not going to get done very quickly. There's too much that needs to be reorganized within the organization. There are other things that need to be built first. And so it's just going to take time. So I'll give you an example of things that could fall into any of these categories, but we lay this out for clients because, again, it can be very difficult to figure out, like, what do I do with all of this? So, sometimes little handbook changes could happen fairly immediately. If we feel as though we've talked to a lot of people who just don't even understand the language of DEI, like just haven't had a lot of exposure to what microaggressions are and tokenism, the impact of bias, those sorts of things, we might recommend some education so we can very quickly start to move people into some workshops and processing circles and just being in the learning mode. A medium-term thing might be, hey, I think you need to revamp your recruiting process. That doesn't necessarily happen overnight. It doesn't need to be like a year-long process, but you probably need to get some things in order to be able to do that, right? So that might be a medium-term action. let's work on redesigning your recruiting and standardizing that process for you. Another medium-term action might be, let's work on your performance management and your promotion process. So how do you make these decisions? What are the criteria? Do you have competencies that are clearly outlined and communicated, and how decisions get made? Those are all things that could potentially be medium-term actions. And then a long-term action might be something like succession, like inclusive succession planning. And the reason it comes toward the back is, if you don't have competencies outlined, if you don't have a good performance management process, how are we talking about how people get all the way to the top yet? And so we kind of organize that for clients. And the immediate things can happen, I think, within like a month to 6 months. Medium term things might be 6 months to a year and a half. Long term things might be a year and a half and beyond. And then obviously there's always going to be ongoing things that we recommend folks do just to keep vigilant, right? So we're always going to recommend, regardless of how great things are going, you got to survey your people at least once a year, right? Keep getting that feedback. Make sure you're not missing anything, or new people might come in and have different experiences that you want to be mindful of. So there might be things that are just ongoing maintenance as well. Does that help, Deshawn?
Yes, that is so helpful. Thank you. And I have one more question. So, we talk a lot about, you talk about having an inclusive workforce. You mentioned psychological safety. I know that, in some instances where employees are in situations where they may not feel psychologically safe, they may not feel inclusive, they may not feel like they have the opportunity to speak up and advocate for themselves in a way that allows them to do it, and there's no kind of pushback, right? So what are some things that employees can do to advocate for themselves, in a safe way that they feel like, oh, I'm not going to lose my job if I speak up for myself?
Yeah. Great question. I think if you are truly in an environment that's not safe, ideally you could just share your feedback. A lot of places say they have open door policies and all this stuff. Like if you do, and that's the organization you have a great relationship with your leaders, then take them up on it. Like you're saying, that's not the case for a lot of people as well. So there are two things that come immediately to mind, but Janae, I'd be curious from your perspective what you would add to this. I think from using your voice directly, when those surveys come around, especially if you can be assured that those surveys are anonymous, and you can ask as many questions as you need to get comfortable with it. Because I've had people ask me, like, how do I know, if I'm the only Black person in this department? By the time you start cutting up the data and all of that, like, you're going to find me. And I'm like, that's just not how we do things. We're very discreet about how we report back. Ask what you need, ask, get comfortable. But if you do have those surveys come around, I think being able to use your voice in that way and to share your experience in that way might be a way of having a little bit of cover, while also making sure that the feedback is being bubbled up. Similarly, if you are leaving an organization, especially when you're leaving an organization, you don't have to burn bridges per se, but I think using those exit interviews and just sharing the real deal. Because what happens is when we don't say anything, we might leave and go on to another situation, which hopefully is a better one. But there also is no data for people to say, well, what's going on here either. So when you get those opportunities, to the extent that it feels safe to do so, please use them. The other thing I would say is, to me, on it's on the allies, or the people who practice allyship. And this is where we talk a lot about this when we go into organizations. There are people who are just not going to have the same privileges, the same power, the same voice. There are people who get penalized for speaking their truth or for raising issues. And if you truly do say that you care about your colleagues and you want this to be an inclusive place, if you have power and privilege, this is now your responsibility to speak up if you see something. And there are ways to do it where, this isn't about swooping in and being the savior and asking to do things where nobody asks you. But hopefully you're in relationship with colleagues, you're getting to know them, and can have that mutual relationship where you see something and you say, hey, I just observed this. I'm not sure how this impacted you, would you like me to do anything, or how can I help you? How can I support you? And if you're able to, even if it's not the powers that be, but build some relationships with people who can act genuinely in that way, maybe they can be a little bit of a cover and a mouthpiece for you if those relationships can exist. I think if you're someplace where you never ever feel safe, you don't feel safe with the leadership, you don't feel safe with your boss, you don't feel safe with your colleagues, I think you have to examine, and I'm not telling you this is, I'm not telling anyone to go out there and quit their job, but I think you do have to examine long term, how does this weigh on your psyche, and your health, and frankly your opportunities too, if that's the environment that you're operating in, and if you can't find at least some allyship somewhere, or the ability to share your feedback when you need to in some way, even if it's not directly, it may not be the organization where you're going to have a long, thriving career.
No, I completely agree. I think starting with the surveys, any opportunity for you to give your feedback that can be anonymous, you should take it on, right? I do surveys in my organization all the time, and people skip it, or they don't put any. They'll say something, oh, it's a 3, and then they'll put any kind of detail of what the issue is. And regardless, like I feel like I've created a very inclusive organization, but people still don't feel comfortable doing that. So if you're in that kind of environment and you feel comfortable doing the surveys, or giving your feedback, you should, right? I think it's important for organizations to understand where they are. The next level up from that is, I think it's part of what Cindy is saying, of finding that mentor in that organization, right? And someone who is at a higher level than you that you can confide in and talk to. And it's a two-way street, because you may find that person and they'll be like, yeah, they've been doing this for the last 10 years. You now have to make a decision, like, since are you staying here? Because if this person who's made it this far up ahead of you is still feeling the same burden, it gives you more information to figure out, make decisions for yourself. The third one I'm gonna say is, at a certain point, document everything, right? Whether if you're having a conversation, if you ever have to have a conversation with HR, you document it. You send them, if they're not going to send you an email recapturing the conversation, you send them an email recapturing the conversation. Send them a supervisor. You keep emails, you keep that documentation, because what you don't want to happen is that environment turns on you, and now you're the bad guy who's getting terminated for something that you didn't do. So if you're going through those phases, you've done your part in doing all the surveys and letting them know how you're feeling in certain ways. You're doing the next part of going up the chain and telling people what's happening, and you're not feeling something's happening. The third part is documenting every single part of it. That way you can secure yourself and be very much confident in when you're ready to go, or when they come to ask you a question, you can come back with all the documentation for them. So Cindy, thank you. This was a great conversation. I think there's a lot, as Deshaun said. I think there's a part 2, because I have a question in my head, but I feel if I say it right now, we're gonna be on here for another 2 hours. But it's so I'm gonna hold it off for another conversation, because I think there's a place for DEI in how it faces minority businesses, right? And I think there's another conversation we should have later on about that. But thank you again. This was a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to learning more about the program, your aligned program in your organization.
This show is brought to you by Julo.shop. Experience more than just shopping at Julo.shop. It's a celebration of amazing products from Black-owned brands. Our product partners are like you and me. They had a vision, and now they're a part of the Julo family. We promise to bring you quality, convenience, and the selection that you deserve. Discover, experience, and enjoy something new at Julo.shop today. Visit www.julo.shop. On today's CEO Quick Deep Dive, we are chatting with Cindy about the Align program and how this self-guided course was specifically designed to help professionals get aligned with their values and goals to chart a clear path forward in the next step of their careers.
So Cindy, let's talk about the Align program. What does Align stand for, and what was inspiration behind starting this online course?
Yeah, thank you. We are really, really excited about this new program. Align stands for Affirmation, Liberation, Inspiration, Growth, and New Beginnings. When I started this company, the Cee Suite, my goal was to coach people toward their aspirations, and then also to do organizational consulting work and to do those things side by side. And the coaching piece was so meaningful for me because most of my coaching clients were women, they were people of color, and they would seek me out. I had a lot of people reaching out specifically so that they'd have a coach who could understand their experiences in the workplace, right? Someone who understands what it is to be gaslit, or people are minimizing your experiences, or microaggressions and things like that. So not that you can't coach people across difference, but I understood why so many people reached out and said I'd been searching for a woman and a person of color to coach me. So that was the beginning of the company. But then very quickly, my work within organizations took up more and more time, and it just became harder to coach a lot of people one-on-one.
So was the Align program specifically designed for women?
It's designed for women of color, although I'll tell you that I think a lot of people, particularly a lot of people with other marginalized backgrounds, can benefit from it. But it's this self-paced 6-module digital program that we're excited to reach more people looking to explore and take the next steps in their careers.
So can you, without giving us all the practical details, how does the program achieve its goal?
Yeah, so we do a few things, right? Our goal is threefold as we work through the program. We start with what we call the inner work, and it's to help people get in touch with their true desires, their needs, to shake off imposter syndrome and disempowering beliefs that can come with some of our workplace experiences. It's to help them define their talents and what success is for themselves. And then once they've done that inner work, we move on to the outer work, which is now, how do you put yourself out in the world? So we have a number of tools and exercises to help people with personal and professional branding, networking, getting your resume and LinkedIn together to find that next opportunity, if that's what's next for you, or even for those who are thinking about starting a business, right? How do you start to generate business ideas and organize your thoughts around that, if that's what you want to do? And then the final leg of it is we end with reminders and some exercises around self-replenishment and self-care, because this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a journey. And, sometimes on that journey, there are ups and downs. And we want people to have resilience and to be able to sustain themselves long after they've embarked on something like this.
So with its focus on living authentically, restoring oneself, and moving with confidence, how do you envision the Align program making a positive impact on participants' overall well-being and self-fulfillment?
Well, the goal is to help people take their own stories back and provide tools for continued growth and reflection. I think the beauty of how Brittna Bennett is my co-creator, she's on my team. The beauty of how we've created this is you may go through this program once, right? There are tons of videos and exercises and things of that nature. You learn a little bit about yourself and hopefully gain some insights that help you with the next steps for where you are today. But program participants have lifetime access to the content. So you may be in a different position 18 months from now and ready to do the next shift and literally just revisit some of the tools and build on wherever you are and gain some new insights and new answers. So we're excited about how the self-guided nature of the program allows people to spend as much time as they need to in any one of the areas that we present, but then also have the agency and the empowerment to revisit and build anytime that they need to.
So how can our listeners sign up for the Align program, and when does it go live?
Thank you for asking. You can visit our website, lifeinthecesuite.com, and C has a CEE, suite.com, as of September 1st, 2023, and the information and link to sign up will be live. And because lifeinthecesuite.com is a little long, maybe you can link it in the show notes or something.
Absolutely. So, Ms. Cindy Joseph, again, thank you. This was a great conversation. I think we've learned a lot about DEI and about the Align program, which I think sounds like an awesome program. I definitely let some of my people know about it. But thank you again for joining us, and we definitely look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
We sincerely appreciate you being a part of Right on the Money, Among the multitude of podcasts available, we're truly honored that you've chosen to listen to ours. If you or someone you know would bring valuable insights as a guest on our show, we invite you to access the guest request form linked in our show notes. We're always excited to connect with remarkable individuals. Remember, you have the power to share the gift of high-level business advice with the CEOs in your life. By spreading the word about our podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you help us reach a broader audience and create a more significant impact. Stay inspired, keep growing, and join us again next time for more insightful discussions.